Today we open our spellbooks, we head to a parallel universe to talk to the lead developer behind Riftworld, Nick. Now we're going to dive into a whole bunch of different things. We're going to be talking about the gameplay, we're going to be talking about the inspiration behind the game, what got it all started, and where it is going. This game looks very awesome. It's going to blend a whole bunch of hardcore first-person shooter action with a very magical aesthetic to it and a really cool art style. I can't wait for you to see this game. I had a blast doing this interview, so without further ado, it's time for you to head to the Rift World.
Before we get into it, just so I know I'm getting the name right, is it Cerulean Interactive or Cerulean Interactive, or am I way off?
Yeah, it's the second one, Cerulean Interactive.
Cerulean, okay, that's kind of what I thought, but I wanted to double check because I didn't want to say it wrong when I was making the edit. Okay, so.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right, so you've been working on this game how long, by the way?
2 years now.
2 years, okay. All right, so before we get into the actual game, tell me about the team. Tell me about what kind of made the decision to start creating games, and why this one? I mean, what led to this?
Yeah, so Cerulean actually has been a bit of a dream of mine since I was a child. I've been gaming ever since I could hold a controller, and I always had early talks with my young friends. We always thought it'd be really cool to make games together, even though we didn't know what that entailed at all when we were younger. I carried that dream kind of through high school and college, and I'm actually studying game design. So I met a bunch of other just awesome developers at the studio I go, or at the school I go to. So we decided we wanted to kind of get together about partway through our bachelor's program and form a bit of a studio. That didn't really start out until Riftworld kind of came to fruition. So I actually started working on Rift as a portfolio piece 2 years ago, solo, and for about a year and a half it was a solo project. And I decided, the project was getting too large, and it was definitely time to bring on some of these buddies from school to really get it over the finish line and make it the best that we could.
Okay. And I have to ask, where did the studio name come from? What's the story behind that?
So Cerulean Interactive, Cerulean is actually a shade of blue that is my favorite color.
Okay.
I use it a lot in painting. I love painting, so Cerulean is just a favorite color of mine, and Interactive is really setting apart games as a medium. It's the only entertainment form that, unlike movies and stuff, that you actually interact with. So it's my favorite color mixed with the medium that we're in.
Perfect. Okay. All right. So let's get into the game itself. Tell me about just the design itself for the game, because you have a lot of different styles out there. You have pixelated, you have the really surreal, realistic titles, and then you have this one, which is I want you to explain exactly what you feel the design style is specifically, and then why a hardcore FPS. What was the drive behind that?
Yeah, so I'm not actually a huge fan of shooters, which is ironic since I'm developing a first-person shooter. Rift, I actually wanted to set out to challenge myself to create a shooter that I would actually enjoy. It's a great way to kind of design games to give yourself a really solid constraint and work around that. So Rift kind of it was my take on trying to create a shooter that I actually could kind of enjoy myself, and then I wanted to pique a lot of players' imaginations with it as I entered into Rift World. It's really just this space where anything can kind of go with the creatures and the magics in there. So it was a really awesome way for me to learn how to make games.
I understand that. And then was there any specific games or movies or anything in between where you kind of drew inspiration from that when you were looking at this title, when you were looking at creating it?
So early on, I realized that the game style that Rift was starting to develop was very similar to Doom playstyle. So Doom, it became a really big inspiration with it being kind of a hardcore, really fast shooter where you're trying to always just keep moving, keep killing, and keep progressing deeper into the realm.
Okay, that makes sense. And then, so I played the demo and the story aspect of the game itself. So I know a lot of FPSs, they focus on the gameplay. They focus on just going through the levels, whether it's speed running or whatever it may be, and they kind of have the story as something that is there, but it's not crucial to the game itself. Is that something similar to Riftworld, or does Riftworld have a story that's going to progress as the gameplay goes on?
So I with the first go around of Rift, we've iterated a ton upon it a lot. There was a driving story, like a whole narrative that was being like displayed through the game, and that became quite the challenge to implement, like to keep the story running while still having this really fast kind of speed running gameplay. And we realized the story was actually taking away from the game. So our storytelling now kind of comes in through environmental storytelling and just posing a lot of questions through like the design of the levels, the enemies and the spells, everything that's present in the Rift. We want to keep on having the player questioning kind of why everything exists as it is, and we're intending on answering some of those questions through little lore books and collectibles that you'll be able to find in the world to kind of shine some light on what's going on in the Rift.
Okay, and that actually is a perfect segue, because the next question kind of focuses on how the levels progress and evolve as the game goes on. How can the player expect... Well, first, I guess the question would be, how long can players expect the game to be from beginning to end, if you could give kind of an estimate on that, if you can nail something down. And then past that, how does the level design kind of change and evolve as you play through the game itself?
Yeah, so the game will probably run for a new player anywhere from 4 to 5 hours. That's with like some replay on a few of the levels, and we're really trying to push into the levels having more and more replay value. That's our big design challenge right now, but as it sits, 4 to 5 hours. Okay.
And so, like, the actual design of each level itself, is that a major impact on the story itself? So in the demo, I noticed every map is very different. You have kind of a more linear approach at first, and then it breaks up into these little islands you can bounce off of, and there's bridges, and it kind of spreads out a lot more. So is this game ever going to kind of have a moment where you have almost an open world or semi-open world level, or is that just not something that we're going to have in Rift World?
The game is pretty much fully linear. The story is kind of taking place as you start on the outskirts of a kingdom that existed within the Rift a long time ago, and you're kind of delving deeper into the kingdom. So you're passing on the outskirts, like the demo showcases just the first 3 levels, which you're on the outskirts of the kingdom. But as you go deeper in, you start to see more signs of civilization, more signs of like you're heading into this massive sprawling kingdom. So no massive open world, but what we are actually looking into a kind of like a little side levels where you'll have like these pop-up portals or pop-up worlds within the levels that kind of take you on these side adventures and then bring you back to the linear trip.
Okay. And then you had mentioned that you started this game as a solo dev, and then you brought more people on as you went. So how much did the game's development evolve over time? Did it get drawn back at some point, or has it just keep scoping? Because I have noticed with a lot of different developers, they have that scope creep, and then as they get closer to launch, they realize there's so much going on, they kind of start drawing back and polishing things up. So kind of where is that currently, and how has that changed over time?
So we've had our fair share of scope creep as well. The initial plan for Rift World was to have 15 levels and a boss fight after every 5th level. Unfortunately, we have decided to cut off the last 5 levels in the final boss of the game, kind of temporarily, to make sure we can deliver the first 10 levels with a really solid, polished experience. There's a nice cliffhanger teaser at the end, and then there are plans to eventually release that last third of the level as a free update.
Okay. And then tell me about just the different spells, the potions, all those different things that players are going to have at their disposal when they get into the games themselves. Just kind of exploring. There was a couple that you got to see in the demo, but what else is going to be available when players get the full game?
So the big aspect and big progression system of the game is finding and unlocking these new spells. Every player starts out with just the standard fireball, mostly as a nod towards Dungeons and Dragons and any good wizard in that game, just hurling fireballs left and right. Mm-hmm. That being like the go-to. But aside from that, we try to take a lot of interesting design approaches with some of our spells. 2 of my favorites are the water bubble, which it's not really a damage spell, but it creates a large bubble of water that creates a barrier for like enemies, navigation, projectiles, and it's a large bouncy surface. So really creating these unique and fun little spells that you wouldn't really see in other games. And then my other favorite is Scatter Seeds, which is kind of like a conjure spell, where you scatter a lot of really abnormally large seeds that kind of follow the player around like they're alive, and they'll actually fight for you by like firing themselves as high speed projectiles at enemies.
All right, and then is there any kind of skills tree in this game? Or is there some kind of ranking up system? Is there something where you can rank up your abilities or your spells? Is that something that's going to be in this game?
It's currently in development. We are working on a way to kind of bolster the player through different attribute changes. We call them trinkets. So you might find a trinket that gives the player extra health, gives you a speed increase, or maybe even like a triple dash on top of your already existing double dash. So rather than giving the player new spells, we're giving you these little trinkets that you can use to kind of optimize your gameplay specifically to how you want it. But yeah, that's our current kind of progression-y skill tree system.
Okay. And then I actually didn't have this question written down, but it does come to mind. Besides magic, is there any point in the game where you have something else that you're going to use as a weapon, whether you know, sword, something else in that area, or is it just going to strictly focus on the magic within the game itself?
Magic is the player's main form of offensive abilities, but you can use the environment pretty heavily to kind of fight enemies and like progress. So one example, one of our earliest kind of environmental pieces that you can interact with is there's these large pillars with lanterns on them all over the place, and if you shoot lanterns or any like kind of source of fire, it'll explode and deal damage to everything in the area, as well as destroying a large chunk of the map. So the environment is the player's secondary weapon.
Okay, all right. And then moving to the enemies of the game themselves, there's a very, I almost want to say abstract vision to them. What was the inspiration behind them, and why did you pick that style for those enemies? And then can you kind of talk about them as you get past the demo, or just the different ones that you're going to be able to see as you go through the game?
Yeah, so the initial design for the enemies, I was developing this solo when I was creating them. So I was playing to my strengths in a sense. A lot of them are these kind of low poly humanoid-ish creatures with no legs and just kind of spinny rotating like helicopter arms. I was trying to design a creature that still was imposing and scary and had character that the player could kind of impose their own like intelligence on, but with it having like no legs and like very minimal armatures, there was no need for animation. So that made it a lot easier for me as a solo dev. And then the enemies themselves all have, it's semi-apparent, but they all kind of follow an evolution tree. So you have like the smallest variant of like a fire ranged enemy that kind of grows, and you can see as you progress deeper in the game, it's like this is obviously the same creature. It still has very similar similarities to the very first tiny fire ranger that you find, but they get bigger and badder as you enter deeper in the rift, and they start to develop different abilities.
Okay, and then I also didn't have this question written down, but during the demo, I noticed obviously as the game progresses, there's just more and more enemies within every single level packed in there. With 10 levels, I can't even imagine what the final one would be like. How intense does this game get? And is there a point where you're thinking of maybe putting in, I don't know, a difficulty of a sort where you can pick, easy, whatever it may be? Or is it just kind of stuck on exactly where it is and players have to figure it out?
The game is inherently meant to be hard. We introduce at least one new enemy every level, sometimes more. And really the difficulty starts to come in the form of the different encounters that kind of take place rather than the standard. You have a ranged enemy far away and a few melee guys ahead of you. That you have all different types of enemies that you have to try to remember how they play, how you counter them, how they attack you. And really the challenge starts to become like keeping track of all these different enemies. We have considered adding a difficulty option into the game. We haven't quite settled on anything that we like yet, because the stock like easy, medium, hard just doesn't really appeal to us. We want to take that and put like our own spin on an interesting system on that.
And I have to ask, as I played, one of the games that I drew a comparison to just based off of the enemies and just the hordes coming at you, was there any inspirational draw from Dark Souls or games like that, because it really felt like at a point you have to die to get through the levels. You know, you have to really try out certain approaches and clear out certain enemies a specific way. Was that something you'd ever thought of, or is that just a unique thing that just happened to come across?
We have looked at a lot of other kind of like the AAA, like the big kind of harder games like Dark Souls, like Doom, where it does feel like a constant grind. But the big thing in the Rift is like it is difficult, but we want the player to feel like you always are making progress, regardless of how many times you've died. You're still clearing a Rift out.
Okay. And then what's your specific favorite part of this game? I know it's a hard question. I like to ask every developer just because you pour so much time into these games. So is there something that pops out? Is it a boss? Is it, a specific level, a player that you, or enemy that you come across? Is there anything you can kind of draw into as your favorite part of this game so far?
Yeah, so I love the whole aspect of the Rift, but I think my absolute favorite, and this came as a slight addition where I felt like the world just didn't have enough life in it yet. So you'll find these small creatures, the little like kind of rock slugs, little crystally rock slugs that are all over the place. They're small, they kind of get in your way, they make little grunts, and they just kind of keep to themselves otherwise. But like the rock slugs just breathe a lot of life into this world, and they also, again, they follow the same scheme as the rest of the enemies, where as you get further into the Rift, they get larger, they get bigger and change themselves as well. But just this little non-hostile creature was honestly one of my favorite additions to the game, because it just breathes so much life into the world.
Absolutely. Is there anything similar to those slugs in like as you progress further? Any other kind of non-lethal thing that kind of breathes more into the game itself, or is that something very, very exclusive to itself?
There have been a few other small AI that came and go. Like we had at one point these little fairies that would carry keys around. Kind of like the golden snitch from Harry Potter. Unfortunately, those did get cut. They weren't impacting the game in a way that we didn't quite want them to. But non-hostile creatures is solely the rock slug at the moment. Gotcha. We might add more back eventually, but for now, rock slug.
Okay. And then, do you have a specific release window in mind?
We are shooting for July 2021. So just a few months out from now, actually. That might change, but we're trying to stick with a hard deadline and pushing ourselves to reach that. But yeah, we're wanting to see it released this year.
And then after that, do you have any kind of, is there DLC planned? Is there kind of seasonal content as the holidays come up? Looking even further past that, do you have, sequels, prequels, or even another game in the works that you guys have in mind at this point?
We have a extensive backlog of extra content that we'd like to add into the game, all of which we're planning on releasing as just free content updates. We believe in like once you've bought our game, you've bought it and everything that entails. We just live in a time period where the developers can add updates to their existing titles. So we definitely want to flush out the world of Rift with content updates. Like I said before, we want to get that last third of the game that was cut back in the game, and then a lot of other exciting things. One that we are heavily looking into is a kind of endless runner mode, like we're calling Rift runs, where you will try to see how far into a single Rift run that you can get based on like how many meters, and it's just going to be kind of procedurally generated an endless runner where you will be experiencing all the different creatures and enemies that you've already encountered in the campaign mode, as well as utilizing everything that you've unlocked in the campaign. You can take those into your Rift runs to go further and further each time. So that's some of the content that we're hoping to add for free after release.
Okay, and then finally, player feedback. So you guys have had the demo out for a little bit now. How much has player feedback impacted how you've been moving forward with the game's development? Has it impacted it at all, really?
So for player feedback, it is absolutely massive for us. This is our first demo on Steam, but otherwise we've been hosting demos in a lot of different capacities, either on itch or just us showing up to universities with Rift World on a flash drive. Like early on, as soon as we could make a build, we had people testing it, and we've been catering to like utilizing a lot of the feedback that we get to change a lot of the different aspects of the game and really push it towards what we're wanting. One example I can give is the potions and apples and everything that are in the world. Whenever you destroy like a barrel, they come flying out kind of telekinetically to the player and like pops into your inventory. Originally, they would just flop out onto the floor. The player would have to kind of rummage through the wood and like try to pick up the potions, and it just really did not work with the gameplay where we were wanting, and that was echoed through a lot of our players' feedback. So it's eventually evolved into what it is now, where these potions and apples like whip to the player like magically.
Another question actually that I had skipped past briefly. What about, so it is releasing to Steam, obviously, and PC itself. Is there any plan to port the game onto consoles? Switch is extremely friendly to indie devs in that sense. Is that something you've looked at, or, past that, Xbox, PlayStation? I know it is tricky right now, especially given that they're in transition to next-gen consoles, but is that something you've looked at this point?
We have been looking into that. We, as a studio, collectively, we grew up a lot on Xbox. So that was we have eyes on getting on Xbox as our first port, but we've also been in talks with Atari on getting onto their VCS, and then PlayStation and Switch are not off the table. We just haven't begun the dialogue, but our first port we're hoping is Xbox.
And another question that actually comes to mind, the game is strictly a mouse or keyboard game. Is there ever an idea, especially since you have thought about porting it to consoles, have you thought about making the actual Steam version, the PC version, controller compatible, or is that something you're not considering at this point?
That is actually something that is nearly finished. We're going to be rolling out full controller support in the next coming weeks for the demo. That is kind of in anticipation of getting on Xbox. We wanted to have full controller support early on.
Okay. And then final question before I wrap it up. I like to ask this one, and not every developer answers it, but do you guys have Easter eggs in this game? And if so, where did you kind of draw inspiration from those, if you want to talk about it?
Yeah, I'll leave a lot of the fun ones. We have plenty. I'm a huge fan of Easter eggs, but I'll leave a lot of the little ones that we have in the game world itself kind of secret. But we have a nod. My favorite movie series is Lord of the Rings, so we have a nod to that in one of our achievements just by the name of it. So I'll let players kind of discover that once the achievement's released, but plenty of nods to a lot of our favorite games and a lot of our favorite forms of media.
Okay, perfect. That's really all I had. Is there anything specific that you wanted to talk about before we end the interview, whether it's gameplay mechanics, something specific about the game, the social media channels that it's on, something that you want the players to know?
Just that if you guys get a chance to try out the demo or get to try the game out in any state, our development team is full. We are just students, and we're learning as we go. So any feedback is greatly appreciated. This has been a beautiful learning process for all of us. So definitely don't be shy to reach out to us. If you like or don't like something about the game, we'd love to hear it.
Now, the demo for Rift World is actually already out. I have the link for that below. So go check that out over on Steam, see what you think about the game. And then I have all of the other social media and website information down below for you to check out for this game. It's a really cool title. It's really interesting. It takes a lot of different aspects from a lot of different things, and it really creates something truly unique and truly special to play. I really recommend that you go check it out. Go talk to the developers over on Discord and really get into this game, because these indie developers have a true passion for what they're doing, and they definitely deserve your support and your attention. Now, that is all I have for you guys. I am Nick Laner. This is The Side Quest, and I can't wait for you to be here next time. So until then, take it easy.
When this is what? You gotta finish your sentence. Over.
That's it. My sentence is over.
Your sentence is what, Brian?